So graciously sponsored this event and brought us together. And thanks to all of you for coming in on such a beautiful evening to really talk about a subject that I think many and increasingly a number of Americans recognize goes to the very heart of the American experiment, which is, of course, that radical, wild notion that we can have a republic of free, equal people who will govern ourselves. It was of course a far-fetched notion in 1776 and 1787 when it started. Of course, we weren't that yet, but it was a promise. It was a vision, and we've been chasing that vision, working hard for it, doing whatever we can, setbacks and gains, but we never let it go, and we have to do it again in our generation. And in my view, and what the book's about, and what I think the question of Citizens United and money in politics and corporate power is about, is whether we're going to be able to do it in our generation, so we have another run of free, equal people governing ourselves. So tonight, if I may, I'd like to talk about why I think Citizens United presents that fundamental a question, that it's no longer just a question of policy about how we finance campaigns. It's no longer a question about how do we resolve when government regulation of corporations, some view as excessive. It is now a question of, like other timeless questions in American life, of what are the powers and rights of the people as compared with the very, very few. What does it mean to be a citizen, a person in America? Because that's what those fundamental questions, right from our revolution all the way forward, including all the amendments, the 27 that have come before, have been all about. Who has power? How do we ensure equality? How do we ensure that wild vision of all people are in fact created equal? And so I'd like to talk about Citizens United and why, what some might have thought as it started was kind of an arcane, even boring campaign finance case, now poses such a momentous question. And I think to do that, once I can briefly describe the case for those who might not have it at your fingertips, talk about where it came from. How did it happen? If it's so dramatic, if it's so wrong, how could it have happened? Because I think when we understand where it came from, we can not only appreciate the gravity of that issue, but also see a way forward, back towards the path of the American experiment as it has a chance to fulfill that great vision that we all carry in our hearts, I think. And then talk about the amendment movement, the campaign for a 28th Amendment to overturn Citizens United, to say to the court, the Supreme Court, you got it wrong this time, we're going to overturn that, and then get back on the path, as I said, because there's been a lot of exciting developments. When we started out, people had said, oh, constitutional amendment, get real, we don't do that anymore, it's too hard, it'll never happen. Well, it's happening as we speak. It's happening across the country. So I want to share with you some developments in that way, and then talk about, if you agree with the analysis and the opportunity, I would say, how you can get more involved and how we can all work together to get this done. So let me just start briefly with Citizens United. The case is called Citizens United versus the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. It was a 2010 decision, 5-4, by the Supreme Court, and what it did, in essence, was strike down the McCain-Feingold law. the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, and particularly the part of the Campaign Reform Act, the McCain-Feingold law, that restricted corporations from spending corporate money to influence the outcome of elections. McCain-Feingold had a rule for human beings and had a rule for corporations. Corporations were supposed to stay out of our elections. That goes back to 1907 and the Theodore Roosevelt administration, the Tillman Act, when corporations were sort of the last Gilded Age before the sort of current one. I think we have something of a Gilded Age now of corporate power. And in the progressive era, they pushed back. They've got balance back into the system, and they banned corporate spending in elections. That's why people say what the Supreme Court did in striking that down, the McCain-Feingold law down, overturned a century of law. This goes back a century. And so Citizens United needs to be understood as doing what it did, which is essentially to say to all of us, we do not have the power, even if we think it's necessary, to restrict corporate money in elections. The Supreme Court said that violates the First Amendment. It violates something called corporate speech rights, something which I'll talk about in a minute is a newfangled concept. It used to be humans who spoke, and corporations were economic entities created under state law. And that's why we'll see where that came from, that notion of corporate speech. But the other thing, when people say Citizens United, I think they're referring to a whole collection of problems or ways we have lost our ability, our control over making sure we have fair, free elections. We're that fundamental American proposition that we come, if nowhere else in life, we come to the ballot box as equals. You know, we come to the ballot box as equal human beings with a single vote. And people are right to think when we say Citizens United must be overturned, we're talking about the whole system that has come out of not just Citizens United, but Buckley versus Vallejo and related cases that said we are not allowed to guarantee that we are in fact equals when we come to the ballot box because of money in elections. And so Citizens United really means two things. No, you can't decide amongst ourselves and get proper sound regulation of corporate money in elections. But it also means we can't have limits, spending limits, and contribution limits, which is why we also see the Sheldon Adelson, the billionaire, super PAC problem. So that's why it's the corporate power problem as well as the money problem. And so to just let me illustrate just how those two are slightly different, but both fundamentally dangerous for a Republican democracy. The first one, the money problem. When Citizens United struck down the McCain-Feingold law, and it was already bad with money in politics, but at least we had the power, if we could see our way through to doing it, to address the problem. Citizens United says we can't. And as a result, I don't think people realize, I think we all realize it's a lot of money. I think people, you know, the number now, people are predicting for 2012, the total federal election spending will be $6 billion. $6 billion. And so people grasp that. But I don't think we appreciate how few sources there are for that $6 billion. And that, when we see that, we realize that's what's government of the few. It's not government formed by the people. It's not just a lot of money. You know, George Will used to say, high spending in elections is no problem. We spend lots of money on potato chips. We spend lots of money on iPhones and all kinds of things. So what's $6 billion on elections? That's important. We should spend a lot. What he doesn't realize, and what those who oppose campaign finance reform don't realize, is that money is not coming from millions and millions and millions of people. It's coming from, here's the number, 80% of the money comes from 0.5% of the American people. So it is not 1%, you know, it's not the 99% who are on the outside watching and 1% are running the show. It's 0.5% are accounting for 80% plus of the money that is contributed in these elections.